Just a month ago, we were the first to tell you how plans for a new VA hospital stalled. The department is battling busted budgets and construction delays in the Ford it's building right now.
Congressman Lee Terry says he's fed up with the holdup and went public with a plan to get the money and break ground now. But current VA policies prevent this so-called build-lease plan from happening.
But the only agency that refuses to do that, or at least won't recognize it, is our VA.
Just days after that report, we learned our local VA dropped 10 spots to 28th on the list for a new building.
Every year, for as long as Congressman Terry has been there, we're always on the list, but we continue to go down the list.
And Brad Ashford calls Terry's plan conveniently timed for the November election. He even claimed the idea wasn't.
Well, we checked. That is not true. The whole Nebraska delegation was in on the build-lease option when it was floated in private meetings. Terry took it public.
Lee Terry, just last week, along with the other members of the Nebraska delegation, sent a letter to the new VA secretary saying, come to Omaha. You come here and meet with us and look at our hospital and review our proposal for a public-private partnership, because nobody at the VA has responded to us since or before.
Well, we are talking with Congressman Lee Terry in a special one-hour edition of KETV Newswatch 7's Chronicle.
I want to get into more of the issues. First, let's talk a little bit more about the VA Build Lease program. Where do things stand right now, Congressman?
Well, we have some good news, and that's just like my campaign manager said, Kent. The new VA secretary, Mr. McDonald, was approved by the Senate, and I had a letter to him saying, hey, we've had these series of letters. Here's the copies of the ones we wrote to former VA Secretary Shinseki, and we need to talk about this. The next day, we got a call from their congressional liaison saying, we know you want to meet. We're going to try and make that happen. Let's talk when we get back. And so we got a new VA director, and 24 hours we had an answer. When we were asking Shinseki for 15 months to have a meeting, and nothing, crickets from that. So if he treats the entire delegation that way, I understand how they had the volume of problems within the VA. But this one's personal to me. This one started 10 years ago when the VA and I met with their director then, and he said, we need $400 million for a new HVAC system. And then we had earmarks. So that's what they were asking for, was an earmark for $400 million. And I'm thinking, what does a new hospital cost? So I went to one of the engineering firms that builds hospitals and asked them, and they said, oh, about $300 million. Unless it's a government building, then it's probably closer to $5. Well, I said, they're asking $400 for just the HVA system. And I think they're better off with a new. And they said, you're right. It would be better off being new. So I went back to the director and said, would it be better that we need to focus on a new inpatient hospital instead of just putting a new HVAC system in, when we know that the plumbing's bad, we know that the electrical is bad, and that still has to be redone? And he said, absolutely, we want a new one. So I started working on it, working with UNMC, working with our business community, and we finally were able to get the VA to come in and take a physical inspection of it. Now, I'm going to tell you, Ben Nelson was great on the Senate side, so he and I teamed up. Any project like this, you got to have a team, and Ben was very instrumental in getting the secretary to actually visit, and both of us made the invitation. He inspected it and said, you're right, this is really bad, did a study, showed that it was probably the second worst infrastructure.
So, Congressman, why are we 28th on the list? Why do we keep dropping?
That is bizarre. When we got put on the list, when we were put on the list 7 years ago, we were number 8 on the major projects list. What we've seen is all of the California hospitals jump us, even though there's an earthquake issue, so they think that they need to get those done. So they put those ahead. But I think the problem here is the incompetency of the VA. Because the VA for 5 years is building 4 hospitals, and they're nearly 100% over budget on every one of those. So what they have to do is delay all of the future projects and raid future years of funding, and that's what's occurring right now.
But wouldn't that push everybody back down on the list? Why just us?
Well, it should, and why just us is one of the questions I'm going to ask the new VA Secretary McDonald.
Yeah, what are you going to ask him? I mean, are you just going to push him on it and say, hey, we demand to go back up in the line or else?
Well, yeah, I'll make those demands, but I also want to put on the table the options of the build lease. And as your story covered, we have 2 government buildings that were built under that method. There's design build, there's other ways of doing it. There's 2 or 3 other options, and all we want to say is, look, this is one of the top hospitals that needs to be replaced. We have options in our community because we have good people. Here are some of those options. Would you choose one of those? And that's what I'm going to push.
And to people out there, and it sounds like Mr. Ashford is one of them, saying you've been there 16 years. Why should we put you back there and hope it gets done in this term?
Well, because you need someone that knows the history of this. I started this project, and our new folks around, I'm teaching them what's going on. Jeff Fortenberry was also a part of that, so he's been very instrumental in this. But Mike and Deb weren't around then. And so I've been the one continuing to lead this. And it'd be pretty naive to sit there and say, geez, I'm a freshman member of Congress, I'm just going to order the secretary to put it up the list. It just doesn't work that way.
Right, and Offutt now is actually in Fortenberry's district now, since they changed it around. Stratcom is in Fortenberry's. I want to ask you, we're talking veterans, but I want to talk a little bit about the wars, if you will, in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
What would it take? You voted to go to war, or for the funding for Iraq.
No, we gave the authority to do it.
And go to war. And you also voted against pulling out of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
What would it take for you to support ground forces from the U.S. going back in Iraq now in light of what's
Well, I'll tell you, I'm pretty burned out of losing our people over in Afghanistan and Iraq. And that's why you haven't seen me criticize the president's withdrawal. The criticism that I did make, though, is that you don't telegraph, we're taking X people out this month and X. That makes you very vulnerable, and all they did is just had to wait us out. I thought the strategy of the plan was wrong, but all of us wanted to have them come home. Congress just made a vote, and it was something like 400 to 20, to say, to tell the president that if you're going to put boots on the ground in Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere, but we singled out those 2, you have to come back to Congress with a plan, and we'll vote on it.
Yeah, well, what's your line?
I voted for that.
Yeah, but where do you draw the line personally? Where do you say, what has to happen? Does it have to be a terrorist attack? What's it have to be?
Well, and certainly ISIS is pressing the point right now. And I approved and appreciate the president's decision to use airstrikes. Hopefully that will be enough. I don't want to see an all-out ground war against ISIS, but there's no doubt that we have a duty there to make sure that the people are protected and the assets are protected. So hopefully we can do it with the airstrikes, and we may have to up those. We may have to help the Kurdish army, and by the way, they have always been the best trained in the Afghan army was the Kurds. And they're doing a great job right now, so maybe helping them. And there's a lot of ways to help the locals, like the Kurdish army, without having to have boots on the ground actually engaged in a military operation side by side. We can provide intelligence. We can provide back-of-the-room operations. So there's a lot of things we can do without risking more of